everybody. It is May 21st, 2020. Yes, it is Raging Chicken's first ever Out the Coop live, and I'm knocking my headphones off in the first minute of the show. Welcome. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken Press. Each week on our regular podcast on Fridays, that'll be tomorrow, we feature our Capitol muckraker in chief, Sean Kitchen, joining us for our weekly wrap up of state and national news. And I'd like to welcome Matthias, I think, if I got that right, and Sinister Breed, who are just joining our live stream right now. This is our first ever Out the Coop live here with Raging Chicken. Thank you so much for joining us. On today's show, well, let me tell you, this is the first episode of Out the Coop Live. So basically what we're doing today is we're doing a little kind of get the kinks out kind of day, right? And tell you a little bit about what the show is, what we're planning to do here with the live show, a little bit about some of the Podbean features. I know that there's been there'll be some people that will be hopping on from actually the Podbean streams. And the Podbean streams, they'll kind of know about how to do this. But if you are new to the Podbean live system, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Tell you a little about some of the plans going forward with Raging Chicken. Before we get into it, I'd like to give a shout out to Area 81. Area 81 is a Podbean user who was one of the people that hopped on an early version of, well, I should say an early version. One of the first times I attempted to work out and play around with Podbean's new live streaming system. Area 81 hopped on, and along with a bunch of other listeners from the Podbean community hopped on. And he actually helped me, talk me through some of the stuff, was able to join in and kind of call in and give me some kind of reflections, was able to give me some sound checks. Hopefully, all of that advice and help that was given to me just by the generosity of the community will still be in play today. I gotta say that in addition to this being on Podbean Live and this being kind of a live broadcast where you can actually call into the show, this is also live streaming on YouTube. For longtime listeners of Raging Chicken's Out to Coop podcast, you will know that we've been playing around with doing a live stream or at least a video version of our podcast each week, and we've made some of the beta runs of that available to our patrons. By the way, you become a patron of Raging Chicken by going to patreon.com/rcpress. You also can support us directly through Podbean. A matter of fact, some of our longest time supporters who have been with us for, as long as we've had the podcast, are members through Podbean Live, or members through the Podbean patronage system. But we've got a lot of our stuff over at patreon.com/rcpress, where you become a patron of this podcast, of all we do to support progressive, independent, homegrown media right here, fight back media, really, right here in Pennsylvania. Okay, so let's get right into the show, and hopefully we're going to get some people joining today. I would love it. I just pushed this out on Facebook a little bit, told our patrons about the show yesterday, and they are hopefully going to join in. So, little backdrop. So, for those of you who are brand new to Raging Chicken, we are based in Pennsylvania. We are a progressive and independent media site. We've been called muckrakers, we've been called troublemakers, we've been called, I don't know, choose your term. And we've been slowly expanding over the years, and our podcast has recently, has been really where we've been putting a lot of our energies, and we're looking for more ways to kind of engage the community, looking for more people to kind of reach out to, and more platforms to be on, to basically expand the work that we do. On today's show, one of the things that got me to launch this now is, as you know, here we are. We're all in this kind of pandemic situation. We are all in lockdown. We are all out there trying to find things to do to keep us from going crazy. Now, again, I know there's some of you out there who might be eventually kind of checking out this site who don't think that any of this stuff is a reality, that don't think COVID-19 is real. Well, okay, whatever. For you folks, you know what? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time kind of trying to talk you out of your dungeon, because I don't think you're getting out of that hole anytime soon. But for the rest of us, those of us who are lived in the fact-based world, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle on multiple levels. I know my kids, my kids have been out of school since, March 13th. I've got 2 little kids, and they're bored out of their minds, right, Scout? Yeah. Bored out of their minds with kind of online education. And I have to say, their teachers have been phenomenal. They have made what could have been a disastrous situation at least tolerable. But it's not the same. It's not the same for the teachers. It's certainly not the same for my kids. And now I've also been home since about the same time. For my job, I teach at Kutztown University, and one of the things that has been difficult is transitioning from an online, for an in-face or person-to-person, face-to-face meetings, regular classrooms, to this online environment. And I have to say, again, shout out to my students who have done an absolutely spectacular job of kind of soldiering through. It's the only way that I can put it. They've had to adjust, I've had to adjust, and they've been there, really as kind of partners in making this semester possible. So kudos to them. But at the same time, this is not just my stories, but these are stories from kind of across the ground. Welcome Instinct for popping in and checking us out. These are stories of, say, students from across the across the campus, really, and not just my campus, but campuses. Stories where you see, yes, a lot of students have been stepping up, doing some amazing stuff, but there's been other students who have just completely disappeared. There's other students that you hope that they are following with the recorded sessions. You hope that they're doing okay. You try to reach out, and when you can, and keep your fingers crossed. And I know this has had a huge impact on students and their families. I've had a student who's basically become the primary point of contact for her grandparents. I've had who are one tested positive for the coronavirus. I've had other students who think about the number of students who had jobs on campus and that was their primary source of income, suddenly are out of work now. And having to navigate an unemployment system, at 18, 19, 20 years old, in order to be able to pay their rent. I've had other students who are just dealing with the trauma and the anxiety that the coronavirus has let loose. And again, this is just from where I sit as a faculty member at Kutztown University and looking at higher education. But these are stories that we're hearing from every sector, from every industry, and it is what it is. So what kind of got me to the point where I wanted to do a kind of live call-in show is one, I guess, think just for that baseline attempt to reach out to the community and be a point of, say, of conversation, of discussion, of connection for progressive folks in the state of Pennsylvania, for folks that are interested in looking for a place where you can have kind of conversation, discussion, political talk, without necessarily getting kind of crazy insane. Although there are those out there, I'm sure, who would beg to differ about what we do here at Raging Chicken. But it is what it is. And so that was part of it. And then there was another thing that was been going on. And if you've been listening to our podcast, you'll know about this. So one of the frames that we launched our podcast back in, I think 2014, 16, something like that. I can't remember. But before that, we had Raging Chicken Press. And Raging Chicken Press was launched in 2011 in the aftermath of the Tea Party victories in Congress, and they after the Tea Party victories were there, and then there was a series of proposals. There was a series of what do we say? Political agendas that kind of swept across the nation. And it became kind of pretty clear it was an agenda of austerity, an agenda of, anti-unionism, was an agenda of basically destruction of the public sphere, right? And so we launched in that kind of environment, and one of the frames that we've looked at things through has been the shock doctrine, which has been a book that came out by Naomi Klein, and she talks about disaster capitalism, right? So it kind of follows on the research that came out of the Chicago School of Economics, where Milton Friedman and others were basically the ones making the case that you need to get the government out of everything. Government is bad. That you have to have the free market rule things. And the problem that Milton Friedman and his cronies found was that his ideas were not very popular, right? Which seems odd talking about it from our perspective today, given the fact that this is like our dominant everyday discourse, right? Common everyday discourse about economics and politics and so on. Excuse me. But regardless, what they began to realize slowly over, and there's a long story that's associated with this, which I'm not going to get into right now, but was that the only time that their ideas of free market fundamentalism, of let the market rule all, the only time that they were able to get any leverage or any traction with those ideas, right, as opposed to a strong kind of supportive state with all sorts of safety support mechanisms and social welfare state and medical insurance guaranteed and employment guarantee, all that kind of stuff. The only time that they're able to get traction with their free market fundamentalism stuff is in the wake of disasters, right? Whether they be political disasters, like say, for example, a political coup, or a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, all right? And Milton Friedman famously wrote about that and said, in those moments of crisis, the only time that people are receptive to those ideas are in moments of crisis. And in moments of crisis, people are scared, and they look out for the ideas that are lying around for solutions. And so what they sought to do is build the intellectual apparatus, at least in the level of economics, in order to make those ideas be the ones that are lying around. And at that same period of time, as we've talked extensively about on the podcast, and I'm sorry for kind of members and other folks who have been listening to Raging Chicken for a long time or know our work, I'm sorry for the kind of extended introduction here. But one of the things that the right did during the same period of time is they built up an enormous apparatus, supportive apparatus, to be those ideas lying around. So, for example, the Cato Institute was founded. The Heritage Foundation was founded. All these kind of huge right-wing think tanks who were out there doing quote-unquote research and making theoretical arguments and publishing articles, commenting about how the government is bad, how we need to get the government out of everything, let the market rule, unions are bad, everything that is commonplace right now in our society. They were arguing, and they knew that their ideas were unpopular. Now, of course, these folks had the benefit of having the support of billionaires and who were funding these foundations, but they understood what it meant to invest for the long term. So they invested in those long-term institutions. They invested in their think tanks, and they also began buying up media, right? So as there was a shift from AM to FM, right, in the 70s and 80s, right, AM stations had trouble with listeners. They had trouble getting ad revenue, so they suddenly were going out of business. And so who stepped in? Well, the churches, especially right-wing churches, and the right wing in general. And they began buying up these stations and creating, silently and quietly, slowly building a media empire. And once they got Rush Limbaugh out there to kind of headline a lot of these stations, they were able to draw in even more revenue, build a greater listenership, and create, in a sense, an emergent structure of conservative media, right? And so all these things were kind of in place up until now. Right? And so now we're living in the wake of, the success of that endeavor. All right. I went way far afield from where I was expecting to go, but bear with me for a moment. So right now we got the coronavirus, right? I think that the place that I sit at Kutztown University, right, in a public higher ed position, in Pennsylvania, we are, I think, very attuned to this dynamic. We are very attuned to the way that crisis and budgeting, quote unquote, and financial decisions and politics all kind of intersect in terms of the work that we do. Now, I want to be clear. Higher education is by no means some sort of special case, right? That somehow this is more important than all the others. And in many ways, higher education has been spared a lot of the pressures of full-blown neoliberalism, full-blown shock doctrinism, up until relatively recently, in part because, of the work that we do. Right. I mean, it's been a kind of a person-to-person kind of engagement. Intellectual work and teaching has, up until relatively recently, been a highly skilled endeavor. But we've seen that process of de-skilling and that process of, adjunctifying the workforce, right? Making a more precarious workforce through kind of the massive amounts of adjunct faculty, of part-time faculty, of, basically I always call it academic piecework, right? Where even if you've got some of the most highly skilled people, teachers and trained teachers in the world with their PhDs and all this kind of stuff, but they're competing in a marketplace that does not want to give them tenure track, or permanent positions. So they end up piecing together a series of jobs in order to do this. And look, a lot of these folks are doing freaking amazing work, but they're doing it at poverty wages, right? That is true all over the country. So we went from like the 1970s, when we had about 60 to 70% of the faculty at any given university, the average across the country, 67% were tenured or tenure track faculty. Right. And then you had some part-time faculty and some adjunct faculty who were kind of using for the quote unquote flexibility. Now those proportions are completely reversed. Now you're talking about the average of 60 to 70% of the faculty are adjunct faculty, right? They are part of the precariat, right? The precarious workforce. They are part of the gig economy, right? That, looking for kind of the next gig from semester to semester, right? So we're seeing this play out. And right now, in the midst of the coronavirus, coronavirus is that disaster that is hitting everywhere at once. And it's directly giving cover for some of the most severe policies of austerity and attacks against public higher education that I've certainly seen in my lifetime. Right. On tomorrow's regular Out the Coop podcast, which we don't do that one live. We actually do that one. We record it and we kind of post it usually kind of mid-afternoon on Fridays. Sean Kitch and I are going to be talking a little bit more about this as we look at the number of universities across the country that have, they've cut upwards of 30% of their faculty. They're eliminating programs like in one fell swoop. And even though there had been policies in place and administrations in place that have been pushing policy of austerity and the destruction of public higher education up until recently, the coronavirus makes it seem as if this is all just about our response to the crisis. They can throw their hands up and they can say, look, there's nothing we can do, right? There's nothing we can do. Like, what are we supposed to do? It's a virus. It's a global pandemic. What are we supposed to do? So it's going to be an uphill struggle. So they're using this crisis as a way to gut public higher education, right? And to basically bring a shock doctrine to education across the country. Famously in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. What they attempted to do in New Orleans was basically, for years, they were trying to introduce charter schools to New Orleans, right? That was kind of one of the things that they really want to do. They want to bring charter schools into the New Orleans public schools and convert everything over into charter schooks. Well, there had been a tremendous amount of pushback, right? Especially within the city of New Orleans and the surrounding areas, primarily African-American, African-American, Latino, Creole. And they were saying, no, this is our community, right? We do not want kind of privateers and profiteers to come in here and decide to somehow take over our, our school system. We want community schools, right? And okay, excellent. That's fantastic. So they fought back and fought back. And then Hurricane Katrina hit, wiped out everything, wiped out huge sections of the city, right? Primarily black and brown people lost their homes, right? Areas were completely devastated. Of course, the real estate developers love that. But also along with that, the school system was devastated. Right. The city, basically saying, look, we don't have any money. Why? Because there's been decades and decades of austerity policies, thanks to the kind of creeping market fundamentalism and the Republican kind of dogma of bad taxes, bad government, allowed for kind of defunding of essential services of the city, schools being one of them. And so the schools were devastated. And the city was saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to rebuild our schools? We don't have any money for that. And wouldn't you know it, that Milton Friedman, shortly before he died, decides to get in the game one last time and starts writing an op-ed, like literally like days after the devastation. Milton Friedman is writing an op-ed in all the Louisiana and New Orleans papers saying that what we need to do is we need to work in quote unquote partnership with the corporations to privatize all the schools, right? And again, people were scared. A lot of people weren't even in the city anymore. They evacuated to Houston, right? They've been evacuated outside of the city. They weren't even participating in the politics anymore because they weren't there. They were just trying to deal with survival at that point. And in comes Milton Friedman and his cronies, and they say, now's the time. Don't want a good crisis to go to waste, right? And so what do? In one fell swoop, the entire New Orleans public school system becomes charterized and privatized. At once, with the support of the public who had been resisting exactly that, right? Why? The Democrats had nothing to offer. There was no progressive movement to push back against what was happening in New Orleans. There was no organized body of people that could resist the money from the corporations that were going to come in to privatize everything, right? And that, Naomi Klein tells that story very well in Shock Doctrine, right? There's a great book just called Katrina that also documents some of this stuff. But even check out Naomi Klein's website. You can check out her response to some of this stuff. She had originally posted Friedman's op-ed too as well in order to critique it. That is still there too as well. Anyways, here we are with the coronavirus. Here we are with COVID-19. Here we are with the pandemic, and we're seeing a nationalization of that process that we saw with Katrina. All right, this is the first opportunity that these market fundamentalists have had to nationalize a process of austerity and destruction of the public and have cover. Right? So it doesn't look like an ideological project. Public higher education, not just here in Pennsylvania, but across the country, is under serious attack. And the key is that it doesn't have to be this way. Right? It doesn't have to be this way. So let me tell you a little bit about my little situation here too as well. Then I'll tell you a little bit about what was some programming stuff we got coming up, and then I'm going to kind of close this one out today. Keep it fairly short today because again, it's just an attempt to, attempt to try this out, attempt to get some of the kinks out, and attempt to see if I was hoping that we're going to get some more people kind of jumping on, just to kind of test things out. But people are kind of popping in and popping out. There, so we might have to play around a little bit with the time. That's one thing that I really like to. I was hoping to get some feedback on today too as well. It's like let's talk a little bit about some of the time that we have, this as a time slot, like right now it's like 10 o'clock, started this at 10 o'clock on a Thursday. My guess is going to be that you're not going to have a ton of people that are going to be around at 10 o'clock on a Thursday, but who knows? Maybe we'll get some people checking out the video afterwards. I don't know. We're going to make this video available first to our members and then to the broader public, just so you can see a little bit about what it looks like, what it sounds like, and get your feedback and comments on it. But anyways, I want to go back to just a little bit about what is happening in my neck of the woods at Kutztown University and some of the things that we will continually unpack on this show, especially the live show. So this is before the coronavirus, right? One of the things, if you follow any of the work that we've done at Raging Chicken, I have been writing since we launched Raging Chicken back in 2011 about the use of budget, right? The use of finances to create and talk about a crisis, and then basically say there is no alternative. There's nothing that we can do, but we cut faculty, cut programs, increase fees on students, raise tuition, and decrease services, and increase class size. There's nothing else we can do, right? It's a natural disaster. That's how they want you to think about it. Well, over the years, kind of uncovered, is that even the way to talk about it? Over the years, I've been part of our faculty union, and over the years, we attempted to find out what was going on, and we eventually did, right? The short of it is this. The short of it is that what happened at the university is they used budgeting schemes as a way of deceiving the public, deceiving faculty, and deceiving students about their budget situation. And all this came to a head in 2011 when we found out that after years of being told that Kutztown University was in serious debt, was in serious crisis, that was like $6 million in the hole, we found out that no, they weren't $6 million in the hole. They actually were $29 million in the red, right? How you doing, Einstein? Rabat, what's going on? Yeah. Thanks for joining in. So basically what we did is we uncovered the way that they were using budgeting and finances as a way of kind of projecting a crisis so that they could carry out an agenda that they wanted, right? And very much outside of the public eye, right? We found out that they were essentially keeping two sets of books, right? One set of books was the one that said, look, we're in crisis, we're in crisis, we're in crisis. Look, here's our budget numbers. Look, we're in a deficit. And the other set of books were the ones that they shared with, the crediting agencies and stuff like this, and internally, which showed that they were kind of like building surpluses, right? And you can check out some of the reasons for that, and my writing at Raging Chicken Press, you can see all that stuff. But I've been following that, and we basically uncovered what the reason was and how they were doing it and how they were hiding money, some of the different budgeting schemes that they had done, some of the financing schemes that they used by creating these nonprofit entities in order to kind of build dorms and kind of keep things off their balance books. There's all this kind of stuff that was going on. So we gradually began to expose that, and we have exposed that. Right, so my colleagues and I, Mike Gambone in particular, reached out to this guy, Howard Buncis, who does an analysis of higher education finances, and brought Buncis in to analyze all the university's finances. We have a report that shows exactly that the university is crying poverty for the wrong reasons, that they're lying. Right, so we've done all this spade work. Right, we've done all this kind of stuff, but I'll tell you right now, it's really difficult to get people to believe those kind of facts because they want to believe something else. They want to believe that even college administrators are acting in good faith. They want to believe that everyone's in this together, right? They don't like the idea that as faculty, as students, that we are in a direct conflict with the administration of the universities and Republican lawmakers who continually kind of want to impose austerity upon our universities, right? So that gets all exposed. We see this kind of policy going forward. We have it, and we've proven it. We've proven it. We've got the admission from our former university president about that this is exactly what they had been doing by keeping two sets of books. A couple years after that, Colleen Bradley, who was the vice president of administration and finance at Westchester University, she blew the whistle on the exact accounting practices that I just described that was happening at Kutztown University, but was actually happening at Westchester too. And slowly we began to see this was not just one university, that it was actually a coordinated and shared approach to doing budgeting as opposed to accounting, at doing budgeting that would allow university administrations to control more of the funds. At the same time that they were able to use quote unquote crisis or a lack of budget to lay off faculty, right? Push back on the union contracts, to raise tuition on students, to decrease services, to cut programs and increase class size, right? So Colleen Bradley blew the whistle on that. Here at Raging Chicken, she reached out to us because she had been following our work and we had been following hers. She reached out to us and we did a documentary with interview with Colleen Bradley, which you can check out on our website, ragingchickenpress.org, and expose that. So we've got all this kind of facts in the world that are out there showing exactly, pointing to exactly the way the university has behaved and continues to behave. And this is not something that happened in the past. Last semester, right? We got our new Chancellor Dan, right, up there in the Apache office in Harrisburg, right? Chancellor Dan is out there trying to work with the union. Nice guy. He's got a great head of hair. But Chancellor Dan is out there and basically coming in, and he's gonna have the ability to basically drop the axe that other previous chancellors have been able to do. Right? I'll be honest with you. From my perspective, it has a lot to do with his big charm offensive with the union, his big charm offensive with the folks on the Democratic side of the aisle, because he speaks their language, especially when it comes to cultural politics. Right? And he's a nice guy and he wants to work with you, right? But the end game is the same. If you look at the actual numbers, the end game is the same. Cut, gut, and punish. So we had gotten word last semester, this is like in fall of 2019, that there was going to be cuts coming. I've been talking about this locally at our campus, in our department meetings, and our meetings on campus for a long time. And basically showing that, yes, indeed, this is what we can expect. We can expect that we're going to get our contract. We were in the middle of contract negotiations. Our contract will get signed. After the contract gets signed, then we're going to see the axes begin to fall. And that's precisely what's gone on. I'm not going to go into all the details of what I saw was going to happen, but whatever. I mean, I wasn't the only one, but I was certainly making the case. But again, it was extraordinarily difficult to get faculty and students and the public, for that matter, to actually see that this is what was really going on. Right? They're much more willing to believe the happy talk from the administrators than they are from the critics and the dark clouds like me. Right? So what happens? We get word that, yep, they're getting ready to roll out the cuts. Right? So thanks to some activists within our local union who are on our Meet and Discuss team, they're able to kind of pry out of the hands of our university administration that, yeah, they were going to cut 60 faculty members. 60. Cut 60 faculty members. That was their number. 63, I think the number was. Right? And they had a document. They showed that they were going to do this. And we also found out that this was a report that went back to the chancellor. The chancellor was saying, oh, we're all working together. Meanwhile, they're already planning for the cuts before our contract was even signed in the fall of 2019. So they did that. That was number one. We knew those cuts were coming. Number two, they claimed that, look, enrollment is down. This is at Kutztown. Enrollment is down, and we don't have enough students to fill all the seats. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our adjunct faculty members, not all of them, but some of them, in particular kinds of programs, and what we're going to do is we're going to reduce their course load. So instead of having a full load at 4 classes, we're going to put them down to 3, or maybe 2 in some cases. Right? Why does that matter for the university? Well, immediately, the university gets a kickback, right? Because those folks no longer now qualify for full benefits because they're part-time. And the only way that they can keep their benefits is to use COBRA, which is like another, whatever, $300, $600, $700 per month to keep those same benefits, right? But they say, look, there's nothing we can do. We don't have enough students. And we want to make sure the classes fill of our full-time faculty, of our tenure track faculty, our tenured faculty. And when they get filled, then maybe we'll consider that elsewhere. We knew that was a bunch of garbage from the get-go. Why? Because we talked to students. And we had students coming into our offices telling us that they couldn't get these classes. The very classes that the university was claiming, the administration was claiming, there weren't enough students for. We pushed back. No, we're going to see what happens. We're going to see what happens. And sure enough, students were clamoring. The administration finally gives and says, yes, okay, we're going to have to find some more space for these students. But instead of opening up those sections for those faculty members who had their schedules cut, what do? They just increased the class size and the rest of us and kept those faculty at part-time, right? So they were already moving forward in terms of those cuts. And that matters for another reason, because in our contract, our union contract, there's a process by which adjunct faculty members can be converted into tenure track faculty members. But they have to have 8 semesters of continuous service. And if one of that gets broken from full-time to part-time, clock restarts. So that's precisely what they did. They broke their term of service. So now the clock starts all over again if they're going to any form of conversion. They've saved on healthcare by pushing those costs off on those adjunct faculty members and their families. Right? They raised class size, in some cases, like beyond the fire codes of the classroom. So we had to switch around classes and things like that, which is great. And, proceeded to say, okay, we're not going to renew some contracts of other adjunct faculty members. Then in the spring comes, right? Just as the coronavirus is starting to get go, we start hearing announcements they're going to stop renewing contracts. There's a big retirement push. They're trying to get a retirement buyout to get people to retire early. And yes, over 200 faculty across the system, like across the state system, they jumped in for that. I forget the numbers exactly at Kutztown. But then we also get the notes, those folks are going to retire. They're going to save the system a lot of money, but we're not going to renew any contracts. In other words, we're not going to hire anybody else back to replace those people. So now you've got fewer faculty members to try to meet the needs of the students who are trying to get through different programs, right? And then we hear more and more, right? This is all before coronavirus hits. By the time the coronavirus hits, right, Kutztown University's administration was already on the warpath of cut, gut, and punish. They were already planning to remove, 60 faculty members, not renew 60 faculty members. That's roughly, 20%, maybe a little bit less, 18% of the faculty, 15% maybe the faculty members. Just we want to get rid of those, right? We want to shrink it down, right? We want to increase fees on students, right? It's not that good. Good. Coronavirus comes, and now students have to leave campus. Universities has to pay students, kind of refunds for the time that they're not kind of living on housing and stuff like this, and some of the feedback, which is, again, I totally support. But now that is now the impetus to say, well, now there's nothing we can do. We're gonna have to significantly cut the faculty and eliminate programs, and that's where we are now. So over the course of this summer, I know my faculty union is, at least my local, is working extraordinarily hard about fight back, at the same time that we're trying to find ways of kind of dealing with the very concrete problems that the coronavirus presents. So initially, at least, when for these, Out the Coop Live, I'll be talking a little bit about this. I'll be talking a little bit about how we can build a fight back, and actually what is happening, and doing some of the more of the analysis and discussion on this. Ideally, what's going to happen is that we find a good time where there's going to be people that are going to be around that want to join in, to bring in your voices too as well. We hope to draw some more folks to our YouTube channel too as well, looking for comments and engagement there. And then if we can get out the kinks here, we're also going to probably start doing a live broadcast of our Friday show, if I can convince Sean of that. This is my daughter, Scout. She is very bored of the coronavirus. Is that right? Yeah. Yes. And but she has been my production assistant, right? You helped me test out all this stuff, right? Yep, to make sure that it's all up and working. And this is our first time running this, so I appreciate her help too as well. But to close out today's show, I want to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the things that are coming up. What I will try to do in the future, as we're going to roll out these on either a weekly or bi-weekly basis, to give you a little preview of what's coming up and our regular Out to Coop podcast that comes out on Fridays, and a little kind of preview of what's coming up. So tomorrow's podcast, obviously, basically what we do in the podcast every week is we talk about the week's news. We talk about what's happening here in Pennsylvania. Again, the focus is, yes, on a national take from a progressive perspective, but then also digging into what's happening here in the state of Pennsylvania. We also do our last call segment is space news and beer. I tend to highlight right here. I live in Percy, PA, and we have our own brewery here called Free Will Brewing. If you haven't tried out their stuff, you should. Their stuff is fantastic. And so I usually talk about their latest releases and news coming from here. We also bring in some beer news from around the state. I'm trying to keep it as local as possible and focus on those local communities. And what was the part I was going to say? Oh, yeah, and then space news, because I like space, and so I like to talk about it. So we talk about that. So we have stuff, kind of national news, we got state news, and we do beer and space news, right? So that's in our last call segment. On tomorrow's show, we actually going to talk about the week's news. Big stuff going on this week. One, just what I was touching on today about cuts in higher education has just been absolutely devastating. Also, last week, actually, Sean wasn't on our podcast last week because he was out and covering, he also does photojournalism. He was also covering the Reopen PA rallies out there in Harrisburg, right? So that's one of the things that we've loved to follow the nut jobs. We do a lot of that here at Raging Chicken. Have it here. Yep, sorry, I got distracted. We do a lot of that Raging Chicken, just kind of follow the nut job, follow what's happening on the right, and follow those kind of protest movements and some of the extremists in the state. So we're going to talk a little about some of the kind of pushes to reopen now and some of the challenge that we're going to face. We're probably also going to talk a little bit about renewed attempts for Kutztown University and other universities across the state to think about reopening in the campus for the fall. So we're going to be talking about that. Next week, I'm going to be talking. So when I say this show, the weekly show or the Out to Coop Live will be like a weekly or bi-weekly show. Part of that has to do is that we're starting doing more interviews with people too as well. So what may happen is it might be 1 week Out to Coop Live, and the next week we'll do Out to Coop interviews. Next week on Wednesday, I'll be doing an interview with Brian Bailey. Brian is a faculty member out in Ohio, and he's someone who I've known for quite some time. I actually served on his dissertation committee. He's also was the editor of a journal that has published some of my work too as well. He's been involved with kind of progressive, kind of lefty politics for quite some time, and is as attentive to some of the crisis in higher education as I have been too as well. So we're going to bring him on the show to talk a little bit about what it looks like on the ground out there at the University of Cincinnati. And throughout Ohio, some of the cuts that are going on there and what he sees with some of the pushback. So that we're going to get that next week. We might do the interview and a live show. I'm not quite sure yet. We might do a live show on Monday and then have the interview on Wednesday. Just check us out on our Facebook page. You can check us out our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook, look at Raging Chicken Press. You'll find us no problem. You can also follow us on Twitter at RC Press, and the announcements will be coming out there too as well. Or you can just follow us right here on Podbean, listen to the podcast. You can join up. Before I go today, so tune into the podcast tomorrow. You can find your podcast. You can look at Raging Chicken Radio or Out to Coop podcast at anywhere you get your podcast. You can search for Raging Chicken, and it'll come up. Search wherever you get your podcast. You listen for tomorrow. Please subscribe to the show. If you like what you're hearing for this part of this live show, I wish we had some more folks kind of join in. I might actually do a test later on, like a nighttime version of this, because my guess is we might get more folks. We can do in the evening. But if you have an opinion about that, please get back to us. You can also make sure you like us on our YouTube page. Follow us and subscribe to us on YouTube, and tell us that you like what's there. This will be posted on YouTube too as well. This will also, like I said, the recording of the show will be made available to our members at patreon.com/rcpress initially, and then we're going to kind of bust it out and let it go live for everybody, maybe like a kind of a few days or a week later. Okay. But you can support this work. You can support our podcast. You can support our progressive journalism. You can support pull no punches muckraking right here in the state of Pennsylvania by going to patreon.com/rcpress and become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Like literally, we had 3 people join just in this past week, which has been absolutely fantastic. It's great to see. Thank you all for patronizing our show, becoming patrons of our show. That sounds better. Yeah. Becoming part of our show, and I'm probably going to be asking my daughter Scout for commentary every once in a while. Right? Yeah, she's very good at it. And thanks a lot. All right, so any feedback you want to give us, please, you could also shoot me an email at ragingchickenpress@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. Leave comments on our Facebook feed, leave comments on our YouTube site, leave comments right here on Podbean. The audio recording, I'm sorry, I didn't even mention this. The audio recording of this will be posted directly to our podcast stream. So if you're already subscribed to Out to Coop podcast, then you will automatically get this in your feed anyway. So no need to find a separate subscription for that too as well. Thank you all. I will keep the announcements coming. I'll let you know when we're doing our next live, and we hope that we'll get more of you to tune in. I'll probably make an announcement on our podcast tomorrow about when we're going to do that. But thanks for tuning in. For those of you who popped in for a little bit, I appreciate it. For those of you who are going to listen afterwards, I still want your feedback. I appreciate your feedback and so on. And for the rest of you, keep strong. All right, do the best you can and keep up the fight. We hope that this will be a space where we can kind of engage in some kind of good discussion, good back and forth, and get to hear your perspective, what's happening out there in the field. All right, so this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken Press. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Rod here. Say, see ya. This is my dog Potter, too, as well. Say, see ya, Scout.
See ya.
See ya.